a ruler of vast territories, a commander of formidable armies, and an Enlightenment monarch who believed he was destined to reform and reshape Europe in his own image. To Joseph, strength was the only currency that mattered, and when he looked northwest, towards the Dutch Republic, he saw weakness. The Dutch, in his eyes, were a curious anomaly, a republic of merchants, too wealthy, too divided, too confident. They controlled the mouth of the river Scheldt, a vital trade artery that flowed through his own Austrian Netherlands but was blockaded by Dutch forts, strangling the commerce of cities like Antwerp. For years, this had been a bitter pill for the Habsburgs to swallow. Joseph II decided he would swallow it no longer. It was time, he thought, to remind these upstart traders who held the real power in Europe. He began with diplomatic pressure, demanding the Dutch dismantle their forts and reopen the river. The Dutch, with a stubborn pride forged over a century of fighting for their independence, refused. The diplomatic channels froze, the letters grew colder, and so the emperor turned to the language he understood best: force. He ordered his troops to the border, thousands of soldiers, the polished steel of their bayonets gleaming, marched into position. Cannons, heavy and menacing, were hauled through the mud and aimed at the Dutch fortifications. The air along the border crackled with tension. Across Europe, diplomats held their breath. Was the continent on the brink of another major war? The Dutch fired again. This time, it wasn't a blank. The cannonball, however, wasn't aimed to sink the ship. It was aimed to make a point. It struck a soup kettle on the deck of the Lalaloos. The kettle shattered with a loud, metallic clang. The message was clear: go back. The captain, having lost his dinner but not his life, understood. He surrendered without a single casualty. The Kettle War had its first and only shot. The incident was almost comical, a tiny act of defiance that should have been a footnote. But for Joseph II, it was a profound insult. His imperial flag had been fired upon. His authority had been challenged not with a full-scale naval battle, but with a single, almost dismissive cannonball that had targeted, humiliated, and enraged. He declared war. The full might of the Holy Roman Empire was now officially pitted against the Dutch Republic. Now, imagine the scene. Tens of thousands of Austrian soldiers are camped along the border. They are the professional army of one of Europe's greatest powers. They are ready for glory, for battle, for conquest. They spend their days in drills, cleaning their muskets, their nights huddled around campfires, waiting for the order to advance. On the other side, Dutch soldiers peer nervously from their forts, knowing the overwhelming force they face. The continent waits for the inevitable clash. Days turn into weeks. The autumn air grows colder. The soldiers wait and wait, and nothing happens. The grand invasion never comes. The emperor, it seems, had miscalculated. He had expected a quick, decisive action that would cow the Dutch into submission. He had not anticipated their defiance, nor had he factored in the diplomatic consequences. France, a traditional rival of the Habsburgs and an ally of the Dutch, made it clear it would not stand by and watch the Republic be dismantled. The cost of a full-scale war, both in blood and treasure, suddenly seemed far too high for Joseph. He had rattled his saber, but he was unwilling to actually swing it. The soldiers, bored and restless, did what soldiers do. They foraged for supplies. In one infamous incident, a small group of Austrian troops rode across a river and conquered a local distillery, making off with a sizable quantity of Dutch gin. This was the extent of the land campaign. The war, declared with such imperial fury, had devolved into petty. The news of the kettle shot and the gin raids spread like wildfire across Europe as salons and coffee houses. Satirical cartoons appeared everywhere. One depicted the mighty Austrian army battling not Dutch soldiers, but an army of kitchen pots and pans. Another showed the Emperor Joseph himself, wearing a chef's hat, surrendering his sword to a giant, menacing soup kettle. The Kettle War, or Kettle as the Dutch gleefully called it, had turned the most powerful man in Central Europe into a laughingstock. The war that began with a bangaree, a clang ended with a whimper. Faced with mounting ridicule and the prospect of a costly conflict he couldn't win, Joseph II backed down. Mediated by the French, a treaty was signed. The emperor received a sum of money from the Duce, a face-saving gesture, but the Scheldt River remained closed. He had mobilized an army, threatened a nation, and started a war. And in the end, he had gained absolutely nothing. His treasury was lighter, and his reputation was in tatters. The Kettle War serves as a strange and timeless parable. It is a story about how the ego of a single ruler can set nations on a collision course. It is a reminder that the line between a show of force and an act of folly can be dangerously thin. Power without wisdom, as Emperor Joseph learned, quickly becomes comedy. History is filled with the stories of empires and armies, of grand strategies and bloody battles. But sometimes history doesn't need bloodshed to teach its most important lessons about arrogance and miscalculation. Sometimes all it needs is a soup kettle. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more strange tales from history. We'll see you next time.